Hello, insiders. It's Justin Rivers here, Chief Experience Officer. As I mentioned to some of you last week during my talk on the abandoned Brooklyn, I almost forgot what it was. I am going away for 2 weeks, so I wanted to leave you with two videos of experiences that our intern George Fry recorded. And the first one is going to be the ship LILAC, which I and Aaron assisted an art installation on. Captain Mary Habstrit, who's also the president of the LILAC Preservation, gave this tour to our insiders twice, 2 Sundays in a row back in July. And we were very happy to have it on the roster and to share it with you guys who are maybe not in the NYC area or couldn't join us. So it's in 3 parts. I'm just going to put those parts in there. There may be breaks in between as usual, but hope that you enjoy. Thank you.
Welcome to my neighborhood. I'm kidding. Oh, we're doing.
Yeah.
Oh, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's why I said captain on my shirt.
There you go. That makes sense.
You want to grab those guys? And...
Yep.
Here we go.
What's up?
Body back to the West Village.
I didn't remember exactly where, but I knew they had
one of those
moved him
like
away.
Charles or one of those streets. I'm sorry.
Welcome to the LILAC, everyone. We did a tour for Untapped last week before we opened to the public. We just opened to the public yesterday for this season. Normally we open Memorial Day weekend. Not just because it's Memorial Day weekend and for a lot of people that's the start of summer, but because the ship was launched on May 26th in 1933, and so we normally start out by celebrating her birthday. So the last couple of years we've had private celebrations. Last year, for this year, we have an Untapped installation here on the stack. Are you going to talk more about that at the end? Probably did it with Justin.
I honestly don't.
Okay. I can talk about it.
Okay.
Last time since Justin was involved, he talked about it. And then in 2020, we had a little party for some of our volunteers, and we gave the ship rivets. Riveting is a lost skill, so it was actually pretty special for a lot of us to see it for the first time in person. We have a metal worker who is our operations chief and grew up working on historic vessels, so he's maintained a lot of those skills. And you can hear we've got people working on board. Sunday is our big volunteer day for doing maintenance and restoration. So we'll try to keep you from getting in the way and from getting injured and all those good things. But even if we didn't have work going on, it was built to be a workboat, not for passengers or visitors. So it's got very steep stairs. A lot of us who work on ships will tell you ships don't have stairs, they have ladders. That's what we call them. And you should climb them like ladders and face the steps. The gangway that you'll be crossing to get to the ship might move a little bit under your feet. It's made to do that. It's attached to the ship, which is floating. And it's meant to slide about so that it doesn't break. So you should hold the railing. There's a very good sailor's rule that you always keep one hand for the ship. Just, when you're moving around, have one hand available for the railing and use it. All right, so we're going to go on in and head up to the bridge. George, would you close the gate at the end?
Yes.
Bring up the tail.
Permission to come aboard.
off before, but you can see why since we are going to be a little crowded in some of the spaces, that's why I asked you to wear masks. And I don't want to have to check everyone's vaccination status. So this is the bridge where LILAC was steered from. And I'll start by giving you a little history of the ship. I mentioned she was launched in 1933. She was built by the U.S. Lighthouse Service, which was a separate civilian federal agency that did nothing but take care of aids to navigation. Not just lighthouses, but also buoys and range lights and other markers that help guide ships around safely. The Lighthouse Service was eliminated and duties transferred to the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard became responsible for aids to navigation in 1939. So this ship became part of the Coast Guard fleet at that point. The Coast Guard is made up of a number of individual independent agencies from the past, which is partly why it's got this sort of portmanteau of duties. You mentioned the Revenue Cutter Service earlier. They do trace their origins back to Alexander Hamilton asking Congress for money to fund fast cutters to intercept foreign ships and make sure they pay customs duties. We're a new country, we needed sources of income. He was the Secretary of the Treasury. And the Coast Guard, by tracing its origins to the Revenue Cutter Service, has been in continuous existence for longer than the Navy, because we had a Navy during the Revolutionary War, and then we thought we didn't need one anymore and we disbanded it. And they had to start over in the War of 1812. And the first ships that fought in the War of 1812 were Coast Guard cutters, revenue cutters. In honor of those origins, any Coast Guard ship over 65 feet is referred to as a cutter. So when LILAC became part of the Coast Guard, she became the Coast Guard cutter in LILAC. She still did all the same things she did under the Lighthouse Service. And those duties were to carry supplies to lighthouses that were surrounded by water, could only be reached by boat. She worked in the Delaware Bay and Lower Delaware River. Many lighthouses there are built on shallow places, but places you can only reach by boat. The LILAC is a floating workshop. She not only brought supplies to the lighthouse keepers, but also could help with major repairs. Tenders even helped with construction of lighthouses by bringing the construction supplies to the site. So the tenders were critical to that network, keeping the lighthouse keepers supplied with dry goods, food, but also all the things they needed to do their job. And for recreation, there was a system of little libraries in crates that traveled around with the tenders and were delivered to the lighthouses. But even though she was called a lighthouse tender, she always spent most of her time tending buoys. And there's a really good slideshow back here that helps you to understand what that work involves. But buoys are markers, they're signposts in the water that guide ships. The color is important. When a ship is approaching a port, they keep the red buoys on the right and the green buoys on the left. Those buoys are marking the safe channel where the water is deep enough for any ship to go. The numbers increase as you head to port, so it gives you an idea how close you are. You can look at a chart, compare the number on the buoy you're looking at to the chart, find out where you are. So they're very important for keeping ships safe. But they do get run over by ships. You've probably seen signs on the street that have been run over by a truck, right? It happens. They get broken away from their mooring and they're floating free. It's the job of the tender to go get them. It also happened, you'll see several photos here that show ice flows on the Delaware River. Ice breaking up in the spring could actually break the chain on a buoy and carry it out into the bay. So this ship had to go and get it and bring it back. Put it in the right spot. If it's not in the right spot, it can't do its job. They get banged up in the process of that. There was welding equipment on board to weld them back together. They had to clean them, to repaint them. One of our veterans who grew up in Arizona, the first seafood he ever had was mussels that they scraped off a buoy. One of the New Englanders got a pot from the galley and said, "We can't let these go to waste." And they ate mussels for dinner. But it's a very hard, dirty job. You can imagine by that story that the buoys come aboard covered in seaweed and slime and sea life, and they're big steel structures. That picture right there on the end of the table, this one I like to use because it shows you the scale of some of the buoys compared to the sailors. This was taken from the bridge in about 1953 by the captain at the time. And this is one of the biggest buoys that LILAC would have lifted. But you can see the ship is actually listing because of the weight being all to one side. And these large buoys have lights on top. So another thing that has to happen is the light bulbs and batteries have to be changed. And it's one of the most dangerous jobs in the Coast Guard. So that was the job of the ship. She kept on doing it until 1972 when the Coast Guard finally decommissioned her. This was particularly striking because she was still running on steam engines. Very unusual to be running a reciprocating steam-powered ship in 1972. We believe that she was decommissioned that year. Other ships were scrapped at the same time. A number of ships were decommissioned in 1972 because the year before the Clean Water Act had been enacted, and all these ships used to pump their waste over the side. All the toilets went right into the water, no treatment at all. The bilge water from the engine room that was loaded with oil went over the side. It all went over the side. So these old ships were hard to retrofit with holding tanks, which is what is used now. They just hold the waste until they get back to land and can pump it out to a treatment center. Some large ships have their own treatment centers on board, some cruise ships that cross the ocean. So this ship, they were so proud to keep it running for so long that instead of scrapping it like the other ones decommissioned at the time, this one was donated to a school. The Seafarers International Union has a training center for merchant mariners. It's in Piney Point, Maryland. So she was there for about 12 years. And then they sold it off, and it was owned by a marina operator in Virginia. He rented out the back for offices and was selling parts off from the ship, especially the bridge here. And he died, and his widow put it up for sale, and that's when our nonprofit bought it in 2003. It cost only $25,000. But we had her hauled at a shipyard and put $250,000 into her at that point, and you can see there's still lots more to do. So from the bridge, this is where the ship was steered from, where they planned their own routes, navigated the ship, and it didn't stay the way it was in 1933. She was in active service for 40 years. You don't keep the same computer probably that you had 40 years ago, if you even had one that long ago. So things were constantly being changed and upgraded. The binnacle compass, and turn the light on inside so you can see it better. That's a magnetic compass, but magnetic compasses are problematic on steel ships because the steel can affect the magnetic nature of the compass. So they isolate it in this non-ferrous housing called a binnacle. And it's all copper and brass with these two solid iron balls that they can move in and out to calibrate it. Later, they added a gyroscopic compass, which this is a readout for that. But as they often did, they kept the old technology as backup to the new technology. The gyroscope is actually down here, and we'll walk through there in a minute. It's like the CPU, and one of the things, because it was electronic, they could have readouts in various places on the ship. In World War II, the ship was equipped to protect the coast. One of the things that was added was sonar, and that's that great big gray box on the wall is part of the sonar system. That was so they could keep an eye out for U-boats. They were very concerned about the threat of U-boats, especially on the Delaware River, which might sound strange, but a third of our ships being built for the war effort were being built in the Philadelphia area, and there were U-boats waiting at the mouth of the Delaware to pick them off as they headed out to sea. She also had a large gun mounted on the bow, 3-inch 50 for anyone who's into munitions, and 20mm anti-aircraft guns mounted on the roof at the back. In addition to all that, she had an anti-mine system installed. Those gauges on the wall are for the anti-mine system. It was like a cloaking device. It had its own generator, which you'll see in the engine room, to power it. And there's a copper cable that runs all the way around the ship, and it actually changes the magnetic signature of the hull. So magnetic mines would not be triggered by the ship passing by. They don't actually have to touch. Some of you might have seen old movies where submarines passing through a minefield very carefully. They don't actually have to touch. The trigger can be set off by a steel hull passing by. So that was very important. In the 1950s, they added radar to help them see further, especially when it was dark and stormy. When we got the ship, a lot of this equipment was missing. The wheel stand, that binnacle compass, all gone. The telegraphs were gone. We have salvaged parts from other ships to give you a better idea what took place here on the bridge. The telegraphs are for communicating with the engine room. There is no direct control over the engines from here. You cannot slow down or stop or speed up the ship. You have to send the command to the engine room crew to do that. This is the main way they communicated. And you just pull the handle and let's see, that's a head half. So this side of the dial is ahead, this side is a stern, that's backwards. And I've sent that command down to the engine room, and it rang a bell, and if I'm really quiet, you might hear it off in the distance. That's to get their attention. And they'll look up at the dial in the engine room and see the command based on the error of that. I just moved on their dial. And then they answer by pulling a handle there, match the two windows up, and then someone's down there. So they're supposed to match the arrows up, so they know enough to pull the handle. Then I know that they got the command. And if they're doing something complicated, like trying to pick up a buoy out there, they're going to be moving these handles like crazy, sending commands down, and they got to keep up with the engine room. People in the engine room can't see where the ship's going. So coordination is really important. It's absolutely critical that this message gets through, so they also had several backup systems to this. If I can just step behind you here, they had a voice tube to just shout down to the engine room, right? There's a sound-powered telephone. I'm going to move you again. This is actually operated by your voice. When you speak into it, your voice makes the diaphragm vibrate, creates a small electrical current, and that's what makes the phone work. So you can understand that would be important if all the electricity is off, the ship is dead, you're trying to solve a problem, and you can communicate to someone else in another compartment of the ship. And lastly, they had a gong on the ceiling of the engine room that you could ring by pulling this, and when you drop it, it rings the gong according to a code. So they had 4 ways to communicate because it could not fail. So that's all I want to tell you right here, and then we'll move on and see some other spaces. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, then we're going to go down here through the gyro room. If you take a peek behind the door, you'll see there's a wooden desk there. That used to be the captain's office. He had a whole suite here, but when they needed space for the gyro compass, he lost his office. And when you get to his bedroom, you'll see there's a metal desk sort of splat against the window, clearly a retrofit. But we'll walk through his bedroom. You'll get to look into his bathroom. The captain was the only one on the ship who had his own head. That's what we call them on ships. And we'll just step out to the boat deck. lowered with the steam-powered winch. And one thing you'll notice as we look at other equipment is they use the steam for almost everything once they had made it. And usually around this point I get a question about what the ship burned for fuel. She always burned oil. She burned bunker 6. It's a very thick, almost unrefined oil that you have to warm up to move through a pipe. So it's very stable compared to coal, which is problematic for a couple of reasons. One is it's very dusty and dirty, but the dust is also explosive if you accidentally hit it with a spark. It takes up a lot of room, and that's based on the number of BTUs you get out of an equivalent amount of coal to an equivalent amount of oil. The oil takes up less space, and it's more efficient. The big scoops that you see, there's 2 here and 2 here. The scoops are to bring air down to the lower deck. So these 2 bring fresh air to the engine room, and these 2 bring fresh air to the boiler room. Both space is very hot because it's a steamship. I've been told by veterans that the boiler room was about 140 degrees. They were limited to 20 minutes of working in there at a time, and they were issued salt tablets to make up for the dramatic loss of minerals through perspiration. And the stack, of course, is for removing the exhaust from burning the oil. And this is a good view of 88 LILAC, the installation that Untapped New York was instrumental in bringing to us. It's by artist Aaron Assis using historic photos of this ship. And you can only see them from the pier, but there's 2 panels on the roof over here that actually contain 88 historic photos, each of them, of the ship, and incorporates the Lighthouse service emblem, which when this ship was part of the Lighthouse service was on her bow. The Lighthouse service emblems were saved by the captain at the time. Captain Lewis, who was working for the Lighthouse service, got transferred to the Coast Guard, was told to throw away all emblems of the Lighthouse service. Throw them over the side. We don't want them. Get rid of them. He couldn't bring himself to throw these bronze lighthouses away, so he saved them, and his grandchildren are giving them back to us. We just need to send someone down to North Carolina to pick them up, and we're going to put them back on the bow where they belong. In addition to that, Justin Rivers, who I think a lot of you know from being insiders, wrote a monologue in the voice of Captain Lewis, trying to get into that head that went through this and speak about how he felt about that transition. And we have some laminated handouts with the QR code. The QR code's on the signboard on the pier. It's also linked from our website, but it's quite short and I think excellently done. I think you'll enjoy that after you visit. Let's go on into the offices. The 4 rooms on this level were staterooms for the officers. The one I'm standing in is just being used for storage right now. But we have one set up there with furniture that's very similar to historic photos that we have. All that furniture was missing from the ship when we obtained her, but we have salvaged, again, furniture from former Navy ships to make it look like it once was. The one thing that's missing yet is a sink. Each of these rooms also had their own sink. If you want to open that door behind you, assuming it says vacant on the indicator, the bathroom door, it's a wooden door.
The bathroom door is open.
Oh, okay. I can't see from here.
Oh, yeah.
That one tends to close itself. So. But that's the officer's head. So these officers shared that room. But again, they had their own sink in their room. So they still had quite a lot of privacy, but not as much privacy as the captain. The executive officer would be the next officer in rank after the captain. And I might add that although whoever's in charge of the ship would be referred to as the captain or the skipper, in the Coast Guard, a ship of this size would have been commanded by a lieutenant. So as far as rank is concerned, he would not have been a captain, and they were all men then. The Coast Guard is very proud of having women early in the service. They credit that to the Lighthouse service. A lot of you might be familiar with the story of Catherine Walker, the lighthouse keeper on Robbins Reef out in New York Harbor. But like a lot of the original women lighthouse keepers, she took over when her husband died. And the Lighthouse service had always preferred to hire families because then they get at least one free employee. They only paid the man, they get the wife and sometimes children as bonuses. And because the work was difficult enough, the wife was helping, the children were helping, and so the first female lighthouse keepers were wives and daughters of keepers who, for whatever reason, through death or disability or disease, could not keep on doing his job. Originally they were paid less because they were women, but they eventually convinced the service to pay them the same because they were doing equally well at the job. And the Coast Guard now likes to look back upon those women very proudly as the first women in the Coast Guard. So we'll go down those stairs. You might, like I said on the pier, go down like it's a ladder. Face the steps. It's incredibly hard to get a photo of the entire room, no matter which doorway you try. And then go into the big room right at the end there. I'll go around another way. I got the needle gunning below us to stop. We use air tools for removing paint. It's very noisy on the steel. So this is the wardroom, W-A-R-D, wardroom. It's the officer's lounge. And it always was decorated with curtains, tablecloth on the table. There used to be a coffee warmer here. There's a coffee pot going all the time. There was a wardroom refrigerator that I think was primarily to add some fresh snacks and side dishes to the food cooked in the galley. but all the food would have been prepared in the main galley. Seamen were not allowed here. The sailors, non-commissioned officers, not allowed in here. This is officers' territory. The only enlisted people in here routinely were the stewards. The officers had a steward who waited upon them, brought their dinners in here, made up their beds, washed their dishes, and did housekeeping like that. The stewards were often drawn from minority groups. The Navy and Coast Guard had a special program to give U.S. citizenship to Filipinos who served in the steward corps. And one of our Filipino stewards has actually written some memoirs of his Coast Guard service and stayed in the Coast Guard for 23 years and retired with honors. So the steward, you'll see as we walk down this hallway, worked from the pantry. There's a kitchenette, if you will, had a steam table built in to keep food warm there. And that's on the starboard side, the right side as you walk down the hallway. On the left, or port side, is the yeoman's office. And you'll see we still use it as an office. That's where the ship's clerk would have worked from. He would have handled personnel records and reports. If you were getting a pass for liberty ashore, you would go to the outer door of the yeoman's office and pick that up. So let's go down to the hallway. We'll be heading to the engine room. The couple of other spaces you passed along that companionway is how they refer to it on a ship rather than hallway, is the chief petty officers' spaces. There's a room, the door is closed because we have our interns sleeping on board, but there's 3 bunks in the room over here for the chief petty officers. These are the most experienced non-commissioned officers and really would have run the ship, even though they're answerable to the officers. Officers usually transfer in and out every 3 years or so, but the chiefs often will stay with the ship for almost their entire career. So very experienced people. So they slept over here. That was their bathroom, and the big room where right now we have some items being stored was their dining room. So they had their own little area. And what I hope you're seeing as we move through the hierarchy is the captain had the most privacy, the administrative officers had a little bit less. We get to the non-commissioned officers and they're sharing everything, including their bunk room. And it keeps getting less and less private as you go down through the ranks. This is the engine room. Several of the non-commissioned officers and enlisted men worked in here, and many of them never went to the other side of that door. That's officers' territory. The engines are right here.
This is the engines. Okay.
It's about the top third. They continue down to the hull to connect with the propellers. So these are the original triple expansion reciprocating steam engines from 1933. And we'll also say that everything that's original to the ship was built in America. This is something we could not do now. So as far as how the engines operate, first of all, the boiler room's on the other side of the wall, or bulkhead, as we say on ships. That's very common with any kind of steam plant, including coal-fired electrical plants. You have the combustion, which is a source of fire risk, in another room from where the equipment runs. So one thing is because it's external combustion, steam engines are very quiet. Unless something is out of adjustment, they're practically silent. So the steam's coming in through the valves there near the ceiling and feeding down through the red pipe, which would have been covered in asbestos lining originally. Very good insulated for steam pipes. And it comes into the engine at this end. This is the high pressure cylinder. They're trying to get as much work out of that steam as they can now. And so they recycle it through the engine 3 times. So each of these is a cylinder where there's a piston going up and down. That's the part that makes it reciprocate. The later technology is turbines, where the steam turned a big fan like blades. So after the high pressure cylinder, it's losing a little bit of pressure. The steam's cooling slightly. This is the intermediate cylinder. And it's bigger because the steam needs more surface area to push against to do the same amount of work. And so the low pressure cylinder is even bigger. And they did have quadruple expansion engines that had a 4th cylinder, but they didn't add enough efficiency for the additional real estate, because you can kind of imagine the 4th one was exponentially bigger. So this was the peak of reciprocating steam technology. The triple expansion engine, very, very common on ships before World War II. They were already becoming dead tech by the time the ship was built. But I believe the reason that they decided to put reciprocating engines in, because they had steam turbine engines, they had diesel engines already. But because of the job of the ship, where it needed to get up close to lighthouses that are by their nature in places that are shallow and rocky, and be able to maneuver over to a buoy that's floating free in the water. I found out from an old steam guy that reciprocating engines can go the same speed in reverse as forward, and some other kinds of engines, at least back then, would lose speed. So I believe that the reason they chose this kind of engine was specifically for the job of the ship. It's definitely why there's 2. Many ships have only 1 engine. Many tugboats, even, which are pushing and pulling other vessels, will only have 1. This had 2 for the maneuverability that 2 engines give you. You can have one going forward and one in reverse to help make a tighter turn. This ship never went very fast. The top speed was about 11 knots, about 13 miles per hour. And this is the other end of that telegraph I showed you up on the bridge. So you would match those arrows up and confirm that you've gotten the command. Now, in addition to the propulsion engines, there are many other pieces of equipment in the engine room. This is what we call the upper engine room, and below us, where you hear people working, is the lower engine room. So the engines extend all the way down through, but there are many other pumps and tanks for moving fluids around the ship. In addition to water and fuel for the ship itself, two of the supplies that they were bringing out to lighthouses was fuel and fresh water. The lighthouse keepers are on a rock surrounded by salt water in Delaware Bay. They have cisterns to catch rainwater, but it's not always enough. So this ship would bring fresh water to them and fill up tanks at the lighthouse. And this ship would bring fuel to run their generators at the lighthouse. This ship had its own generators for power on board. This is one of them. It ran on steam as well. This tall part is a single cylinder steam engine. So there's a piston in the top there, and the cylinder moving up and down. The steam's coming in through the pipe. And that up and down motion of the steam engine is turning the motor generator and making DC electricity. This ship was all powered by DC in its day. We are now getting power by having a great big plug that's plugged into an outlet on the pier that's giving us AC electricity. So we're converting some of it, that gray box in the corner there is a rectifier for turning some of the AC into DC so we can run some of the older equipment. And interestingly, if you know anything about solar power, solar panels make DC and you have to convert it to AC, so any solar installation also has a rectifier for that conversion.
Does the ship ever move? Do you ever go out?
We are not operating as yet. Our
Oh.
plan is to restore this to run on steam. The engines can be turned over by hand. We can crank them over. Do you need to get through, Michael?
No, I'm good. I'm waiting.
Okay. We are not able to make steam yet, though. The boilers still need a full assessment. As you can see from the sign, we've got some friable asbestos in there.
Right.
One of our crew has been certified in asbestos abatement, and we have abated some areas where there's not as much as in there. A couple other things you can see here. I mentioned the degaussing system, the anti-mine system from World War II. That generator, which cannibalized long before we got the ship, so you can see those parts missing. Even if you don't know anything about generators, looks like something that's half there. It's because parts were taken long ago, but that was the generator for the degaussing system. And the plaque on the wall, the builder's plate, is original to the ship, but it was missing when we bought the ship. We have had things come back to us. That had been taken by the last chief engineer of LILAC. He thought the ship was getting scrapped and turned into razor blades, as a lot of us like to say. And so he had taken it as a souvenir, and when he discovered that we were restoring the ship, he sent it back to us. We've had a couple of stories like that. The wheel on the bridge came back from one of the captains as well. And I just opened an email this morning from someone who's got one of the original telegraphs. I told you the telegraphs we salvaged from somewhere else. Those are not the original ones of the ship. Some of these things are still out there. And I'm not sure what he wants for it. I'm hoping he'll donate it, but one of the original telegraphs has been found.
Look at eBay.
Yeah. They're very expensive.
Oh,
They're also considered collector's items. And just the brass
right.
is worth quite a lot of money. Yes, and we put it up with bolts that would be very hard to get off. You'd have to work at it for a while. We don't want it to disappear.
Right.
Obviously, it's unique to every ship, and they're very collectible as well. We didn't think we'd ever see it again, so very happy to have that back. Are there any other questions I can answer here?
I guess this isn't specifically related to the engine room, but I'm curious, what's the longest voyage the ship ever went on?
Well, it worked in coastal waters. It never was out for that long. From what I've gathered from veterans, 5 days would be about as long as they would go out. So they didn't have to worry too much about running out of things while underway. One thing I can add, though, to the story of the engine's operation is that they had to use fresh water for the steam and worked in salt water. So they had to recycle that fresh water. And there's a condensing tank, that big white tank there down below, where they would cool it. It had a saltwater jacket to cool the fresh water. And then they would send it back to the boiler and use it again. So they needed to conserve that fresh water. But they were never away from the dock for very long. They did expect to be out longer during the war, and so they added tank capacity. They made some modifications as part of the World War II upgrades to add storage for fresh water. Anything else I can tell you? Right. So I think they're working on this side, so we're going to go out that side and go forward to the buoy deck. So left on your way out the door. Well, Michael, what's happening down there right now?
We're good. Luke is looking for remeasuring the plug.
Okay.
We're not doing any cutting or welding or anything.
Okay. Does anyone really want to see the lower engine
A
room?
little hammering, that's it.
Okay. Well, if there's just a few people, why don't we do it at the end? I could bring some of you back in. As you take the insiders last week, it's not typically perfect.
Yeah, standing by.
All right.
Go back in on the other side. Layers open. This is the galley where all the food would have been prepared. This is the buoy deck. That boom is for lifting the buoys out of the water. You'll see the deck is rippled from buoys hitting the steel plating. And each side of the buoy deck has a section of bulwark that could be lifted out. You can see the seams here. This section could be lifted out by the crane and left behind at the dock. Any photos of her running, these are not there. I've had veterans come and go, oh my God, I've never seen the bulwarks back in place. So that just made it easier to get a buoy onto the deck. You have to lift it over that small wall. The hatches go down into the cargo hold, and all those controls on the mezzanine in front of the pilot house are for the boom. And you can see they're color coded. They're sets of 3, a forward and a reverse and a brake for each direction that the boom is moving. And one of the things you walk by after you cross the galley, there's a storage room full of rope and chain and stuff. That was originally the petty officer's head. I haven't shown you where the petty officer slept. It's down below at the back. We're doing paint removal in there right now, so there's lead dust. I don't want to take you in there. But they had to walk all the way from the stern up a ladder and up here to use the bathroom. So again, not so convenient, not so private. 12 petty officers sleeping together in a bunk room and having to walk almost the length of the ship to get to the bathroom. I think we can probably go in to see where the sailors slept if you don't want to do that. It's down another level for
Is this orange?
negotiating their steep ladder. did that like a sailor. Yeah, the reason there's a bar up top here is so they could swing down. Okay. So you can see currently this is the bar up top. And the reason, one of the reasons we started workshop is to bring people like down here. This was but there would have been bunks for 16 or 18 last year. They hung from the post. They had a bunk that was supported on the outside by a chain, so you could fold them up and have a look at through during the day. This ship, they did not have hot bunks, which some ships, especially submarines where there's not a lot of space, the bunks would be shared, and if you were not on watch, you'd be sleeping, and then you'd switch with the next guy. About sailors, 16 or so. They would have had the square lockers like you see against the wall there, and through the door is our cargo hold. I mentioned up on the deck that you could open the hatches and lower equipment down into the hold. Some of the original workshop of the ship would have been in there. There's cages along both sides. They would have had a metal lathe in there to make parts. And like I said, the ship was like a floating workshop to assist the lighthouse keepers and do repairs of buoys. But you can also feel when we came down here, it got kind of airless. The ventilation was notoriously bad down here, at least after World War II, because they sealed up all the portholes. The choice bunks were at this end where the ventilation pipes come down. And when a sailor was transferred off the ship, they would draw straws for the bunks there. But not really very nice. On a hot day with the sun baking the buoy deck above us, gets very hot in here. One of the reasons for our awning is not just to have space for events, but it helps keep this space cooler. The cargo hold used to be like a rainforest in the summer, very, very nasty. So when the ship was in active service, the sailors would sleep in other places, any place they could find a cool spot. Up on the roof decks, if there was a breeze, crawl spaces underneath the wheelhouse, just trying to find a cooler spot than down here. So you can just head on back up. Oh, one thing before you do. Not used to taking people down here, so almost forgot about this. But I mentioned the degaussing system, and this is part of that. We've actually been removing a lot of it because it's made up of cables running around the ship. And the problem for us is, because we want to make the ship operational again, is those cables penetrate every wall, every bulkhead, which means that the ship is not watertight. If you get water in this space, you want to be able to close it off. You don't want it to go into the next space and the next space and the next space and sink the ship. It's what happened on the Titanic. They had bulkheads that didn't go all the way to the ceiling, and water was able to overcome them and move to the next compartment and weigh the ship down. So we're sealing up all those penetrations, all those holes. But we're keeping the junction boxes because we opened one up and discovered this rainbow of wires inside. And wanted to keep some parts of the system so we could explain it to people. And this is the first one where we put plexiglass over the top. It was just closed up with a piece of steel. And eventually we'll have all 4 junction boxes on display.
Do modern ships have degaussing equipment?
I don't think so. Although I did hear one story where they were still using the degaussing system in the 70s, and we didn't have the chance to ask the person who said it why, but we're speculating that they kept it active because of Russian submarines during the Cold War. So I think it's a dead technology, that it's been replaced by something else, but they probably are still concerned about submarine attacks from countries that may become our enemies on short notice.
And why did they close the porthole? I mean, what was
So
it?
that enemies couldn't see the lights from inside the ship.
Huh.
There's some spaces with special switches, so when you open the door, the light goes out. You close the door, the light comes on. And that's so that enemies can't see the lights and target you.
Okay.
So you can head on up then. They used to play a lot of pranks on each other from the stories I heard. Like they used to put a bowl of boiled eggs on the table as a snack, so you could just drop in and grab one. And so they'd sometimes put a raw egg in there just to pull a prank on a friend. The TV is representative of the fact that they added a TV after World War II for celebration of the crew. And we were pretty sure that was the case because of the shelf and the fact there was an AC outlet installed there. That I was able to verify that with one of our veterans. And then we have a volunteer who's one of those kind of guys who never throws out anything. And I called him up. I said, "Do you have a 1960s portable TV by any chance?" And he did. So it does run, but we haven't found the right adapter to hook up a DVD. But we want to play old television shows on it eventually. And then I think the only thing you haven't seen is the petty officer's quarters. Now I told you that there's some paint work being done here.
Good to see you too. I hope I see you before I have to head out.
Okay, good luck in school.
When they're out away from the dock. A tour of duty for a lot of people as far as how long they were assigned to the ship was often 2 or 3 years. But the chiefs, like I said, often stuck with the ship for a very long time. It's very hard to build a relationship with Coast Guardsmen because the officers literally get transferred every 3 years. You get to know the captain of the port in New York, and then he's gone or she's gone. I don't know if you happen to have heard that the Coast Guard just promoted its first woman to admiral, vice admiral. There's only one admiral in the Coast Guard. It's the Commandant, but she used to be the captain of the port in New York. About 6 years ago. All right, so I'm gonna go back and show the people who want to see the lower engine room into that space. Is there any other questions? Thanks for coming. Thank you. Yep. Push button. Pretty much. I'm a supervisor. Yeah. And since I don't bring people down here very often, I don't know every single piece of equipment, but a lot of this is for pumping fluids around the ship, including the bilge water, the water to the showers, pumping water to the lighthouses, pumping fuel to the lighthouses, pumping water from the condensing tank to the boiler. So a lot of this is pumping. That's the condenser.
So I may have missed it, but are these the large parts that actually turn around
Yes.
and power them?
So,
okay.
Piston is pushing this up and down, right? And then it's getting turned into a circular motion down here. That's turning the crankshaft. And there's one pump that's missing, which we've had a lot of conversations about replacing, and that the circulating pump was here. And that brought salt water in to cool the fresh water. So there was a saltwater jacket on the condenser. And they would use the cool water from outside the ship to help cool down the fresh water.
So this is a 501c3.
Yes.
Oh, nice.
How much more is below us? Not just the bilge.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just space to collect all the fluids that fall down.
Take off. But,
Okay.
Next weekend, it's Saturday, Sundays, or?
Sundays for the maintenance and restoration.
Okay.
If you're interested at all in working with the public, we're open Saturday afternoons too.
Okay. All right. I'll send you an email.
Okay,
All right,
thanks. Yep. Oh, and I don't know if Michael happened to tell you, he's pretty religious about it, but we have a work log to write down your hours.
Okay. Is it in
So
the
in the
same?
wardroom, there's There's a rectangular cabinet on the starboard side, and the middle, sort of the middle bottom drawer, there's a notebook, and there's blank pages that self-explanatory.
And it's in the room that's where the computer
Where the
is?
table is,
The table,
where
okay,
you're sitting.
got it, all right, thanks.
Thank you.
Have to count up your volunteer hours.
Yes.
I know, I work for not-for-profit, and we have to get everybody's.
Yeah, I haven't had